A major rainstorm and flood event is now unfolding across southeastern Australia. We're going to cross live now to the Bureau of Meteorology in Victoria for the latest details.
The main areas of rain look to have shifted a little bit more towards the east and northeast, so it might be that Melbourne itself doesn't quite get as quite heavy rain, but Melbourne itself is still very much in the severe weather warning area. So I'll ask James Taylor if he can come in and talk us through that a bit more. James.
Thanks, Andrew. Morning, everyone. Okay, so it's been raining this morning. Melbourne area has so far had around about 10 millimetres. There's been some thunderstorm activity. Out west we've seen quite intense rainfall. Navarre, just near the Stawell region, had 15 millimetres in 20 minutes or 16 millimetres in 20 minutes. Very heavy rainfall and significant rainfall. And out west we've also seen totals in the order of 25 to 40, even as high as 45 millimetres in the 24 hours to 9 a.m. this morning. So we're starting to see significant rainfall associated with the cloud band that's ahead of this system. Now we've got converging tropical moisture that's moving southwards, streaming southwards associated with this trough, and over the next couple of days we've got some serious situations unfolding. The most likely area is the northeast ranges where we'll have the greatest concern. Now I need to talk a little bit about the detail to give an idea about what's likely to happen over the next 24 to 48 hours. I'm going to start with Melbourne, because in Melbourne the real risk looks to be over the next 6 to 8 hours. There's a trough that will make its way with a southwesterly change into the Melbourne region later this afternoon, probably around 5 or 6 p.m. As that trough moves through, we're starting to see heavier shower and potentially thunderstorm activity develop along that trough out over southwestern Victoria. So as that moves through, that's when we could see quite heavy rainfall associated with thunderstorm activity in the Melbourne region. There's a reasonable chance we'll see clearance, potentially as early as peak hour with any luck. But with that clearance, it doesn't send a message that that's the end of the rainfall. What will happen overnight is we'll see a low pressure system develop over northwestern Victoria, and we'll see very heavy rainfall associated with that low pressure system. Now exactly how that low pressure system moves over the next 24 hours will determine where the heaviest rainfall occurs. It's likely that it will move across northeastern Victoria, and that's why we're so concerned about that region. Flash flooding and riverine flooding are real concern in that area. For Melbourne, it's now looking like the heaviest rainfall will be more to the northeast, with a bit of luck. But Melbourne is still a risk tonight. If that low makes its way southwards and we have the dynamics and that very intense tropical moisture associated with it move over Melbourne, then the early hours of Saturday morning will be a real risk for the Melbourne region. That's why we'll have severe weather warnings current for Melbourne over the next 24 hours or so. There will be a clearance over southwestern Victoria. There's some chance that the severe weather warning will be contracted out of the southwest later today, because that drier, cooler air will be moving into that area. However, sheep grazier's warning is current in that area, so still an issue for farmers with that cooler, drier air with the rainfall. Now, with the heavier rainfall occurring over the northeast ranges from Melbourne overnight tonight, we'll see that low pressure system likely weaken during Saturday, and another low pressure system in eastern Bass Strait develop. We'll see the moisture wrap around that low pressure system and wrap itself back into southern Victoria. That is where the detail is. If that wraparound occurs back into Melbourne, then we could still have a risk on Sunday. Our latest guidance is indicating that wraparound will be more into west and south Gippsland and potentially even central Gippsland. The good news is that low looks to be moving off quite quickly to the southeast. That means Tasmania could have some issues, but in terms of the rainfall wrapping back around, it looks less likely that we'll have very high rainfall totals at the moment, but of course it's still a risk. So the risk really lasts right through until around about lunchtime on Sunday for Victoria, but Tasmania, with that low pressure system deepening off the east coast of Tasmania, will still be a risk during Sunday.
Can I ask a few questions?
No, can we just hold questions to the end?
Yep.
So just hear that flood first.
No worries, I'll hand it over.
Okay. Just while Elma comes in to talk about flood, so in summary, we're still dealing with a very complex meteorological situation and working out how it's all going to pan out. So to talk about the flood possibilities, Elma Kazic.
Elma, E-L-M-A, and surname is K-A-Z, A-Z-I-C. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. So the Bureau's hydrologists are working on the current flood watch. We are going to update flood watch shortly. There's a likely possibility that we will contract the flood watch from the western part, so some of the catchments in the west might be excluded from the flood watch. At the same time, because of developing weather situation, we might include some other catchments in the eastern part, Far East Gippsland. So the current flooding situation is indicated in the flood watch that we are looking at potentially moderate to major flooding in the eastern part of the state, so it's still a significant flood event. We still look at the communities to be updated, to look at the latest warnings and latest information. Look at our website, look at our Twitter. The flood hydrologists are constantly monitoring the situation as it develops. We are running our hydrological models, and most likely from later this afternoon we will start issuing flood warnings for the specific catchments. So at this stage, as per flood watch, we're expecting moderate to major flooding in the eastern part of the state. A likelihood of minor to moderate flooding is easing a little bit in the west, but we're still keeping some consideration about minor to moderate flooding in the western part of the state. Thank you.
Thanks, Elma. And of course, for response, always look to SES Victoria. They're pushing out lots of information, and they've got a website. Now, questions on flood, meteorology, anything?
Can we start with rain and then we'll go to flood?
Sure. Okay. James, would you like to come talk rain?
No worries. So, in regards to how many mils are we expecting in Melbourne just for today, and then can you also take me through maybe the northeast area as well? How many mils should they expect, just for people sort of trying to figure out how much rain to?
Yeah, sure. Look, the real risk will be as that trough moves through today, and so basically any time from now through to the middle of the afternoon, if you get thunderstorm activity, then the sort of rainfall rates that I talked about that occurred near Stawell, 15, 20 millimetres in half an hour, that's where the real risk will be. That very heavy, intense downburst associated with any thunderstorm activity. If we've got a cloud band that's across Melbourne, which is just bringing general rain, so it's still going to be wet and it's humid and uncomfortable, but the greatest risk for flash flooding will be with thunderstorm activity during today. In terms of rainfall totals, if you don't get thunderstorm activity, then it might only be somewhere in the 5 to 30 millimetre range for this afternoon, but broadly across the weekend those rainfall totals will still keep mounting. If you do get thunderstorm activity, then we could easily see up to 50 millimetres, even higher, 80 millimetres quite quickly as that system moves through. Once we get the clearance this afternoon, then there'll be a bit of respite, but if that low pressure system does allow its most intense rainfall overnight to occur over Melbourne, then we could easily see broadly another 50 to 80 millimetres overnight. With a bit of luck, that heaviest rainfall will stay more to the northeast of Melbourne.
When was the last time this region saw that kind of rain?
Look, we've had an event like this is unusual at any time of year. We've had an event earlier this month where we had 25 millimetres in Melbourne, for instance, but in terms of severe thunderstorm activity bringing extremely heavy rain, it's not that unusual during the summer months, particularly during spring months, but if we do get rainfall in the order of, if those two systems do come off and we see rainfall in the order of 50 to 100 millimetres or even more, then it would be probably around about a decade or so since we've had that sort of rain. But at this stage, it's really about waiting and seeing exactly how that low pressure system develops overnight to see what sort of rainfall totals we get.
Some people looking at the BOM radar might think that the worst is past, as it looks like it's sweeping across, like you said, the north of Melbourne. But you're saying that it could still come back and with a change, the rain could still fall quite a bit. Yeah,
look, it's understandable that the focus is on Melbourne, given the population here. The risk is going to be up until at least this afternoon and then overnight. So people really do need to be aware, watch the radar, stay tuned to the warnings, listen to their local emergency services in the Melbourne region. Elsewhere around the state, that's a very different story. The northeast ranges, for instance, is very likely to see extremely heavy rainfall over the next 24 to 48 hours. In those areas, if you're in low-lying areas, then I would be particularly concerned, and you need to be starting to think about what actions you're going to take.
Which area are those specifically, towns-wise?
Well, in terms of towns, anywhere that's nestled on the northeast slopes of the Divide. Again, we can't be... whenever you go back and look at an event and the rainfall totals after an event like this, it's always quite scattered in terms of where the higher totals are and where the lower totals are. I think it would be incorrect for me to say specific towns are at risk at this stage. That I would say, though, that it's likely that the northeast rivers are the greatest risk for the riverine flooding. I'll let Elma speak more to that. But in terms of the way the moisture is converging, we've got very strong upper dynamics occurring at the same time as this low pressure system develops. We've got the moisture, tropical moisture converging, and the thing about the northeast ranges is the ranges. So the northerly flow gets lifted, and that is what creates the heavy rainfall. So the highest rainfall totals are likely to be along the ridgeline of the northeast ranges, but anywhere along those western slopes of the northeast ranges will be a particular risk.
For lots of rain, are these perfect conditions? Is this a perfect storm?
Yeah, look, it's a good question. I think that these sort of conditions can and do occur. The thing about this system is the way the upper dynamics really tied and linked to the surface low pressure system. So at the moment we've got the upper trough, which is really going to help drive all this rainfall. It's still out over the bight. It's moving very quickly though, and it will catch up to the surface trough. And the upper dynamics associated with that when they come in phase is what will allow the very fast deepening of the surface trough overnight tonight into that low pressure system, and that's where the heavy rain will occur. Is it a perfect storm? Well, we do see dynamics like this fairly often at different locations around the country, but it is an extremely good setup for very heavy rainfall for Victoria.
Scott Williams said yesterday that in terms of conditions, this is a 10 out of 10 weather event, and that it was once in a generation kind of stuff. Is it playing out in that kind of way at this moment? Do you still think that holds up?
Yeah, look, I watched that question, and I think it was a great question. And look, to me, a 10 out of 10 is a rainfall record. We've looked at the current rainfall guidance, and there's locations that we're forecasting across the northeast ranges that could beat their previous December rainfall records by as much as 20 to 30 millimetres. So a rainfall record to me is a 10, and it's very likely that we're going to see rainfall records broken. The most likely area, the northeast ranges. It's not to say that other areas of the state aren't at risk. That's why we've got a severe weather warning that's current across a broad area.
Any more river questions?
Yes, I think so.
Elma, would you like to go?
We'll start with Melbourne, Ella. If we get 50 to 100 mils, what sort of flooding and weather would we see in Melbourne?
Well, with the 50 to 100 millimetres across the Melbourne catchments, you could probably see some moderate to major flooding developing in some parts, and again depends really where the highest rainfall occurs. That's where the highest impacts are going to be as well. And every flood is different, so different floods behave in different way and impact different areas as well.
Is there a danger zone, so to speak? Is there a place where if it rains there, it'll be serious?
Any place, if it's rained there seriously, is going to be impacted seriously as well. So not particular sort of danger zones. You can think it from the point of view as well of the catchment management authorities and Department of Land and Planning. They do the planning maps, which is to identify the areas most subject to flooding and advise us not to build there our places and houses. So those places would probably be the most endangered places, if you like, in that sort of context.
Are there any rivers you're particularly concerned about, especially in the northwest?
In the northwest, I think the flooding impact is probably looking lesser at this stage. The northeast is the constant where we're thinking of the highest probably floods to result out of this rain, and for that reason we're still keeping moderate to major flooding sort of potential in those places. The catchments that include Avens and King in particular, then the Kiewa River catchment. We wouldn't exclude certainly Broken River and Broken Creek catchment and the Goulburn catchment as well. So across the northeast, generally looking at a moderate to major flooding, so still very significant event.
Okay, any more questions on this event?
What about for Tasmania? What's the situation there?
Tasmania's probably a little bit out of our patch on this. James, would you like to comment at all? Please come to the microphone.
Brief things about Tasmania. I've had a bit of a look in that part of the world today. As that low pressure system develops during the weekend, then gale force winds are definitely possible along the east coast of Tasmania if the current guidance comes out as planned, and heavy rainfall. There's flood watches current for the northeast of Tasmania, and also I believe the Huon River, and so there's a real risk there. The thing about this system is that other parts of the country are still going to have tropical moisture over them over the next few days and into early of next week. So there's some concerns of follow-up moisture streaming down during the middle of next week. At this stage, it's too early to speculate with any details about where that moisture might impact, but it's certainly something that we're all watching very closely.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Okay.